Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Patty Framo here. Today is Monday, September the 17th, 2018, 4 p.m., your second daily dose of happy for the day. And it's been an unusual Monday, Patty, because I have a new morning co-host. Tom Wells is just going to do the Friday podcast with me. And this morning, I actually welcomed one of our listeners as our new co-host. His name is Louis D'Souza, and we had a really good launch today. So Mondays are a little bit different for me now because I have a new morning co-host.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Is he your only one that's not a life coach, or is he a life coach?
He is not a life coach, although he's very knowledgeable. I have one other who is doing the Sunday podcast with me. That's Anne-Marie Kanata McEwen, who's a good friend of Louise's and mine. She and Mike actually are both good friends and practitioners and so forth. And so I guess she was the one who kind of broke the mold in the sense of bringing in life coaches. I haven't done it without life coaches since my brother and my sister-in-law did it with me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that'll be cool to see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, so far so good. I mean, you know how it is. The first episode or two, there's always trying to feel each other out and get a feel for the pattern and all that kind of stuff. But no, we seem to come together pretty good. So that was a good thing. Good way to start a Monday.
Finding out how much you talk over each other like I tend to do.
Oh, well, hey, we all do it. Believe me, everybody does it. That's one of the things that you're trying to time, you're trying to figure out, okay, where's my spot? Where's her spot? How do we make that work?
Right, exactly. Is he just taking a breath or is he
taking a breath? That's right.
Do I dive in here or am I still waiting?
Well, actually, Louis is actually a rather slow talker. He's very thoughtful and very selective about how he expresses himself. So there's lots of gaps that I could actually go into if I want to. With him, I'm finding I just have to, wait for it, so that he can get his whole thought out,
Well, that's cool.
Cool. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite. I tend to shove all my words in there somehow.
You and I do the same thing, really, actually. So how was your weekend? Did you have a good one?
Oh, it was great. I actually went to Kaboo, which is this 3-day music festival here in Del Mar. It was a lot of fun. The weather was absolutely perfect. Got to see all kinds of cool old bands like the Zombies and Earth, Wind, and Fire. And, Robert Plant and Katy Perry, and really fun.
Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's actually a band that 3 of their tunes are on my positive play music list. So that's good to hear. I didn't even know they were still playing. That's good to hear.
Oh man, they were amazing. It's unbelievable that, especially the lead guy. He's in his 70s and he is just running around on stage. It's crazy.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch.
Louise and I met up with some friends on Saturday down in Rhode Island. And these are friends. The woman is a friend of Louise's from when they went to junior high school together, and they've been in touch all these years. And we met with her and her husband, and we were making jokes and having fun and so forth. And one of the jokes that I shared was about how one of our favorite TV shows, a program called As Time Goes By, it's a British telecom show. In that series, one of the protagonists, one of the secondary characters, is an older gentleman named Rocky. He's the father of the lead male protagonist, and Rocky is, I think, 82 or 84, something like that. But he behaves like he's 43, and full of energy. And his favorite phrase is "rock on" and all that kind of thing. Well, there's one particular episode where the main group all decide that they're going to put on a party for some senior citizens. And it's part of an initiative called Help the Aged. And Jean Pargita, who's played by Judi Dench, asks Rocky, would you like to help out? And of course I'd love to help out. Oh, poor old souls. It must be absolutely awful to be aged. And here he is, he's 82 years old, right? So it's all in the mind. It's all in the mind. If you decide that you're young, if you decide that you're feeling good, then you are young and you are feeling good. Doesn't matter how many years you have.
It's really interesting because I work one of my jobs is working as a hospice social worker in the hospital. And it's amazing how you see some people come in who are a certain age, like they might be in their 90s and they're actually the caregiver of the patient, and they drove themselves and they're sharp and they have high energy and they just have all this like life force that's so strong still. And you get other people who are like in their 50s and they look like they're 90. It's amazing how different it is.
It's where I'm sure you probably get the same feeling. I really start to strongly believe what Abraham teaches, that aging, or what we call aging, the deterioration associated with aging, is all due to thought process. And when I see
Hmm.
people who have, just like you described, some people well on in years who are just, lively and totally alert and doing stuff and active, and other people in their 50s who you can tell they're on their last gasp, it's pretty darn
Yeah.
clear. It has nothing to do with years. It has to do with thought process.
It really does. It really does. It's pretty crazy. But
Yeah.
I was also thinking, right before the podcast, we were talking about what to talk about today. That whole thing with the the podcast we did last week
With
with
Julie.
Julie
Yeah.
Ryan, Ask Julie Ryan, that was really interesting.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And
Really good.
yeah, and of course, I've already zoomed through her book,
Oh, have you? Wow.
and
You moved. I haven't even been able to open it yet. You got the whole book practically read.
well, because I got the audio version, so I get to listen to it while I drive, and I drive a lot for work. But what was so interesting is how, from what she does, where she goes into kind of reads people's energy and
Mm.
is able to see a lot of things. I mean, that was just amazing to me to begin with.
Hmm.
But that she can do really kind of mapped out the 12 transitions, 12 stages of transition as somebody's getting closer to dying, and what it looks like, and the people that are surrounding them. It was just fascinating. And it made me kind of go in the next week looking at my patients who are in the hospital, who are on hospice, and some who pass away when they're in the hospital, just trying to envision what that must actually look like.
Mm.
It would be so cool to be able to see that.
I'm trying to
So
figure out what the 12 are, to be honest. I guess I have to read the book to find out, but
yeah, well, it's on her website, askjulieryan.com, and it has, here I'm giving her little plugs. She was so sweet to give us plugs.
absolutely.
And she has kind of diagrams of what it looks like, and it talks about the people who have passed, and she also sees them, some things as angels, where according to Abraham, whatever your frame of reference is how you're going to kind of interpret that.
Sure.
And she was Catholic, so for her it was angels. But how she saw with every single death or transition, the same pattern occurred, where the parents form at your feet if they've gone, and your pets are off to the side, and here's your kids, and here's the other relatives and friends. It just was so interesting to hear how she has it all laid out,
It's
and
like a
how
tableau.
those. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And how they continually join more and more and more. It just builds as someone gets closer to passing. Um, and the fact that she could kind of see this bubble above their head, that was their spirit when it was starting to sort of detach from their physical form,
Wow.
and watch that. I mean, it's just fascinating. But, one of the things I've seen even with the patients that I've worked with in hospice is a lot of times people really do see people who have passed, like
Mm.
their loved ones, and they never find it scary. They always find it comforting. It kind of freaks the people out that are around them,
Hmm.
unless they have that belief system.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like a soft welcoming or transition into that next, whatever that next phase will be.
Well, I've always found it humorous, and I know they intended it to be humorous, that Abraham tries as much as possible to be as disrespectful as possible about death.
Right.
They refuse to call it death; they call it croaking.
Exactly. 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 And it's so funny how you'll get some people go up there and start talking about it, and they're all upset, and they kind of won't even go there.
Right.
They won't even go there. It's kind of like, well, that's sort of ridiculous, because they're now in pure positive energy and
Hmm.
you can still connect with them.
Mm.
But I didn't know if do you have any past experience with that with your family members who you've seen anybody
Some.
transition?
My main story along that line, and I've told this previously on the podcast. My father passed in March 2008, approximately 5 months after I first learned about the law of attraction, and he had been suffering from symptoms related to Parkinson's disease, and I won't go into it. I'll just say that it's pretty nasty. But
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to use law of attraction to help him as much as I could, and I didn't know how to do it, so I was kind of frustrated. And so
Mm-hmm.
leading up to his passing was actually really tough for almost all of us. I mean, it wasn't quite as tough for me just because I didn't live nearby. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to visit a couple times, but even on the day he passed, I was 200 miles away. But even so, it still was a rough period just because it was so rough on him. He had a hard time.
Yeah.
But after he passed, a couple things happened. Three things happened. First is that I was amazed because I found I'd done all my grieving. I didn't have any grieving left to
Yeah.
do, which really
Yeah. It's
surprised me.
interesting.
I was expecting, okay, now I'm going to do all the grieving, right? And nothing happened. And I thought, okay, well, that's different. I've never heard of that before.
Hmm.
Second thing that happened is my sister, who has been involved in all this spiritual stuff a lot longer than I have, and has been working on developing her psychic abilities and so forth. So she's a little bit more in tuned or attuned than I am. But she received a message from my father a few days after he passed. And in that message, my sister, you would have to meet and talk to my sister in order to understand what I mean by this. But my sister is very much a different person. She's very much her own person, and
Hmm.
she has her own very specific personality, quite different from mine, quite different from everybody else in the family. PJ is a she was a theater major, so she has a drama side to her, and it sets her apart. So when she receives a message from my father, the first thing at that point in time, especially that I was wondering is, well, is this a real message? Or is this
Hmm.
something that she's just making up? Well, she tells me the story, and the story goes like this: she and my mom were in my mom's church that following Sunday, and all of a sudden she started getting a headache, massive headache, like a migraine type headache, which she never gets. And she remembered from her psychic classes that this could be the sign of somebody trying to contact her. First thing she thought of was Dad, of course, because he had just passed. And so she put out there, Dad, is that you? And got back, yes. And she was all excited about that. And the first thing my sister thought of, here we are. We've just experienced his passing. She was there helping my mom feel better and so forth. What's the first thing my sister asks? What's it like on the other side? Not the
Well,
first question I would have thought of, but that's the first question that came to her
that's
mind.
what she was most curious about,
She was.
obviously.
She was very curious about it. And the answer that came back was festive. And
Oh, wow.
that for me was proof that it was my dad. Because that's what I call a dad word. It's a word my sister would never use. My sister would have said amazing, fabulous, incredible, fantastic. Festive would not have been her word. So
Hmm.
that's what proved to me, okay, this is my dad talking. So that was the second instance. And then about 2 months later, I felt every one of us felt good about the aftermath, so to speak. I mean, we went to a memorial service for my dad like the following week, which was really weird because, except for perhaps my mom, all of us were in a really, really good space. And we were sitting there. You know how in a memorial service situation, before the service, you meet with the minister in a private room, so forth. So
Hmm.
I guess you're there to be consoled and so forth. So we're sitting there, we're talking, and I realized that's what we were there for. We were there to be consoled, and none of us needed consoling. And you could see
Yeah.
the confusion on the minister's face. He had no idea what to do. Like this was not his normal situation, right? He was expecting tears and all that kind of stuff, and we're joking and laughing and having a good time. Like, what the?
Well, it's funny because I've seen that again and again. It happened with myself. It happened
Really?
with a real good friend of mine. And I've seen it many, many times
Mm,
because, especially when somebody has kind of a long or slow or painful, like where they're just not, they're suffering,
yeah.
you have an opportunity to do a lot of that grieving ahead of time because it is so traumatic to go
Yep.
through that.
And
But
it's
then,
relief. It's a relief afterward.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's relief because you're like, gosh, I'm just so happy they're no longer in that pain. They're no longer suffering like that.
And plus, we had to have
And
that message, and the message from my sister basically reaffirmed he was fine. Everything was
right,
okay. So
right.
that made it easier for us.
Yep, absolutely. I had a interesting experience. I actually had two brothers die when I was growing up.
Mm.
And one of them, they were both 9 years old, but 10 years apart. One
Mm-hmm.
was younger than me. The one that was younger than me is the one that I was close to.
Mm-hmm.
And when he passed away, I was, gosh, 12, I believe.
Wow.
And so it was just really, my parents were having such a hard time. It was kind of in an age for myself where I wasn't able to really have my own grieving process. I kind of
Mm.
did, but not really.
Yeah.
And it wasn't till really that I went off to college. I don't know if it's because it allowed me the emotional space or I was more mature and able. I don't know what it was. Maybe the loss of moving away from home,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was, it just all started coming up for me. And I was having such a hard time. And I was really actively grieving through that process.
Mm.
But then I had a dream. And in my dream, my brother came to me and he was still 9 years old and he looked the same. And I carried him around and we just spent the day together. and had a really nice time. And he said, well, I got to go back to being dead now. I just wanted to, I mean, it was crazy. And he said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm okay. And it was just such, I mean, I woke up, I was like, well, I just bawled for like 2 hours. And then it was like I was done.
Mm.
It was so reassuring to me. And it was so, you know how those dreams you have that are just like so real.
Mm-hmm.
It's so real. It was one of those things. So
Well,
I really felt like I felt very reassured by it. And I felt like I really did make a connection with him.
the story I was about to tell was exactly the same kind of story.
Mm.
Because a couple months after that memorial service, I was kind of missing my dad. And I knew he was fine and I was okay with that, but I just kind of missed him. Well, part of it was because of the Parkinson's. For the last few years of his life, he really wasn't himself. One of the things
Right.
that happens with Parkinson's is that the patient kind of develops a mask. My dad was always
Right.
a rather happy and gregarious person, and after the onset of the Parkinson's, he just couldn't be that way. He was
Oh.
like a shadow of himself, and so I missed my old dad. The dad that
Mm.
I knew. And I also missed the fact that Louise had never met my dad like that. She'd always known him as a Parkinson's patient.
Oh,
So
yeah, very.
like there was like some unfinished business there. And I really
Mm.
just wanted to talk with him again and so forth. Well, like you, I had a dream, very, very vivid dream, incredibly vivid. So vivid that, you know how most times with dreams, touch doesn't really have real touch to it. This had real touch to it. This is like, whoa,
Wow.
this is you touch and you feel like you're touching an actual wall or actual person or whatever.
Hmm.
It was that kind of thing. And we
Wow.
just
That's
had this
cool.
long chat. I have no idea why we were on a hill of of a university, a campus. I have
Huh.
no idea why we were there, but that didn't matter. The main thing is
Right.
I'm
It
there,
doesn't
I'm
really
hugging
matter.
him, I'm talking with him. We had this long conversation. It was great. And afterward, I just felt fine. I just felt really good. So very
Mhm.
similar circumstance, very similar experience, I should say.
Yeah, it's interesting too when my mom also had dementia for many years, and
Mm.
I was, helping to take care of her and oversee her caregivers and all that kind of stuff. A lot of medical issues, and actually, that was really part of what led me to going into hospice in the first
I
place
wondered
years
about that.
later.
Yeah.
Hmm. Because I really had very little support at the time.
Mm.
My sister was back east, and she was doing as much as she could, but
Yeah.
distance wise, it was just difficult.
Right.
And so when my mom actually passed away, it was very sort of surreal. There was
Hmm.
something about it that felt like I mean, I think Julie had mentioned this, where you feel like you're an orphan, and that was sort of my first thought, is I felt like an
Mm.
orphan,
Hmm.
even in my 40s or
Yeah.
whatever age. Also, it sort of felt like the layer between me and death had, like, one additional veil had been removed.
Yeah, Louise made that comment a few years back. How like we're on the front line now. Like, oh, thank you so much for that
Yeah,
comment.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then the other thing that was weird is time, like, felt condensed. Like, I felt like it was a time warp. And I felt like, okay, at that time my kids were still living, at home. And I thought my kids are going to be gone in a week and I'll be gone the next week. It was
Hmm.
just really odd,
Hmm.
really odd.
Yeah.
So everybody's got their own way, I guess, of dealing with it. But
Well, the circumstances are all different too. I mean,
mhm.
you just described an incredibly different set of circumstances because with dementia, I mean, the classic joke with dementia is that every day is a different day. But in reality,
Right.
it's a frustrating day every day because you're
Right.
constantly having to deal with the fact that she forgot almost everything probably, and
Yeah. Well,
that's got to
thank God.
wear
I
on
got
you.
to say, the one thing I was really lucky of is you see a lot of people that do develop dementia and Alzheimer's have personality changes that are not positive.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But she was so
Oh,
easygoing, and
good.
she did not care. She just shrugged, was like, yeah, whatever, like no matter what, which was kind of her personality anyway. But I was
Mm,
lucky that it was that way.
that made it easier.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
but you're still
But
dealing with
another,
stuff.
I'm sorry.
But you're still dealing with the stuff. That's the thing.
Right. Exactly. It's true. It's true. And I had this really interesting experience. I mean, these are sort of these very woo-woo topics today.
Oh, hey, this is woo woo central. I mean, I like to say that it's woo central because we're only halfway woo, but
Today we're like crossing over into the full woo-woo.
that's right. We're in full
But
woo woo.
I had this crazy experience. Speaking of, like, sensing somebody coming back, I had this foot injury where I had, for like a year, it was just bothering me, and I had tendonitis and all sorts of things. And I was wearing a boot that this podiatrist recommended I wear for 4 months. It still never got better. And he said, "Oh, forget it. You're basically telling me that's it. Too bad. Nothing else we can do." And I was like, well, that's not going to work. So one of the doctors I met at the hospital referred me to this orthopedic surgeon, which I'd been avoiding because I didn't want surgery. And I went to him, and at this point, it was kind of a hopeless situation. But he said, well, I think we can figure this out. I've got some things I can try. And he gave me this. One of the things was, to that day, he gave me a cortisone shot that was in the top of my foot between my toes. It was pretty much like having a baby in my foot. It was
ouch.
one of the most painful things.
Yeah.
But then the idea was I was going to come back in a week, get stem cell injections, which he takes your blood out and spins it, put them in, and puts it back in. And what it does is it creates a lot of inflammation, and then your body heals itself. But it's supposed to take some time. So the next week I went back to have the stem cell injections, and I was super anxious because they're going to do it in the most painful part of both sides of my ankle.
And you already know what that feels like. Yeah.
Oh man, I was so nervous. I'm like praying to my mom on the way to this doctor's appointment saying, okay, Mom, I really need your help. I need you to be there with me, make it not hurt, and make it get better right away.
Right.
I didn't even want to have to wait the weeks for all that stuff to happen.
I don't blame you. Yeah.
So I walk in the doctor's office, and the doctor turns to me and says, are you related to Mary Framo? Which is my mom. It was so freaky. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And it turns out his father was good friends with my mom. They were both therapists.
Nice.
And I had the 2 shots, and they didn't hurt.
Good.
And 2 days later, I took off the boot, and I haven't put it on since. It's
wow. Very nice.
Crazy?
Yeah, that is wild. That's good. That's a nice story, because anybody who's facing up
still
to
there for you.
Yeah, there you go, right? Well, she was there for you in more than one way, because I'm not sure exactly how, but for whatever reason, through her direct intervention, maybe through getting a message to the doctor or whatever, you didn't experience the pain you were fearing. That's a big deal.
Crazy. Yeah. That was pretty shocking. So, well, one of the things that actually made me bring up this topic is because in a few weeks or a month or so, I'm going to be giving a talk on, it's like my financial planner is putting on this talk called Aging with Dignity. And it's about doing your advanced healthcare directives. So it's like this continuum of before, during, and after.
Right.
So my first question, Walt, is do you have your advanced healthcare directives done?
I do not.
Okay, I'm going to send you a link after this. I'm like on a crusade.
Patty, the number of things that we have not done would absolutely astonish and scandalize you.
Oh, man. Well, we all do what we can do. But this is one of those ones that is super critical and so easy to do. So let me just ask you this. I'm curious. What was it that kept you from doing it? Or why haven't you done it? Or did you not even think about it?
I haven't given it any thought. And the reason I haven't given any thought is I'm too busy living.
Yeah.
That's really it.
Yeah. I get that. I think that's probably true of a lot of people.
Yeah.
But one of the things I keep seeing in the hospital is people coming in without that, and then they can't speak for themselves anymore, and they haven't designated somebody to speak for themselves, and then the family's all up in arms because they're fighting over what they would have wanted done or not done.
Well, Louise and I do have an agreement on that. We've already figured out exactly how we're going to protect each other in terms of standing up for each other. So we got that part figured out. We just haven't documented it anywhere.
So you've just got a verbal advanced healthcare directive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, first of all, the first part of it is we've agreed we're not going to get sick.
Yeah, well, that's the best way.
That just simplifies things,
That just takes care of it.
That's exactly
right. I'd rather everybody I think wants to just go in their sleep.
We're just going to stay healthy. We're just going to stay healthy. That's all there is to it.
Have you decided how long you guys are living? Have you kind of made that pact with yourself yet?
Not specifically in that way. I have expressed the idea that I want to break some records and get to 150 and have it 150 fabulous years.
Nice. Now I wonder what is the oldest person that's ever lived? I don't even know. But if you follow what Abe says, we can keep going and going and going.
Well, that's just it. I think I want to try to test that theory. Not test it. That's the wrong way of saying it. I want to explore that. I want to see what I can do to improve my thought patterns over time so that I can have a full life that just keeps going and going and see how far I can go. Now, how far is that going to be? I don't know. But and I can tell you right now, I know for a fact I still have a ton of work to do. I've already come very much aware of that. Very, very much aware of just how much work there is to be done. But that just makes it an interesting challenge for me. It's like, can I do this? Can I get myself into that really good frame of mind and just knock out any ideas about aging and sickness all tied together, and aging being the precursor to death and so forth. Can I change that mindset? It's a pretty big thing to change. I
It
mean,
really
you
is.
know, but I
Yeah.
figure, hey, what else am I going to do? I might as well give it a shot.
Exactly. Exactly. Interesting. So when your dad was ill, did you guys have support, or were you all doing it yourselves, or what was that like?
Well, my parents lived in a senior center that has a combination of independent living, assisted living, and what would they call the third one?
Skilled nursing?
Yeah,
One of
it's that
the highest level.
they didn't call that, but that's what it amounted to. Yeah, I can't think what they called that. Rehab. They called it rehab.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Also skilled
and
nursing.
so he had basically everything he needed right there. And they, it was good care by today's standards, I would say.
Hmm. Nice. And is your mom still with us?
She is. She was still living in. She was the one who wanted them to move to that facility because my mom was almost 11 years younger than my dad, and so she knew odds were
Oh.
she was going to be around, well, quite a bit after he passed. But interestingly enough, after he passed and after she'd been there for a few years, for quite a few years, she decided she didn't want to be there anymore.
Hmm.
And
Why?
uh, I would have to devote an entire show to explaining my mom's psychology. I can give you the
Okay.
answer that she gave. She wanted to be with family. That was the answer she gave.
Hmm.
But that would only be like scratching the surface.
Okay. Okay.
Now,
Was she able to go be with family?
well, that's part of the story because coincidentally, my sister was working at a law firm as a receptionist, clerk kind of person, and hating it, absolutely hating it, wanting so
Oh.
much to get out. And she has other projects that she's been wanting to do that she couldn't get to. And part of her way to pay her bills was she was providing in-home care to a woman, relatively young woman with cerebral palsy. And so
Hmm.
she was used to being awakened in the middle of the night to take care of stuff and so forth. So that part, from her perspective, was easy. She said, "Well, I could do that for mom. Well, I mean, I'm perfectly
Wow.
willing to take care of mom for the rest of her life. If I can,
Wow.
especially if I can leave the law office, I don't want to be there anymore."
Right.
So
So it was a perfect fit for the two
yeah,
of
well,
them.
we looked at the finances and we figured out, okay, do we have enough money that we could get a house for her and so forth? And long story short, we did. They're currently living on the shoreline in Norfolk, 1 block away from
Wow.
from the seashore. Yeah.
That's cool. Is your mom still pretty healthy? Mostly.
Uh,
Sort of.
mostly. I mean, like I said, we'd have to do an entire show on my mom.
Okay.
There is far
I,
too much to describe there that I can answer in one sentence.
okay. I just was wondering how that has been for your sister, because even if you're kind of caring for somebody, it is different when it's a family member, I think.
Actually, from what PJ told me the last time I talked to her, which was just a few days back, she said taking care of my mom's been the easy part. The part that she's not been used to because she's never been a homeowner is taking care of this home that they now own.
Oh
And
yeah.
dealing with the fact that when they took over the home, it still needed some work, even though it was sold as being ready to go. It really wasn't. There were a number of
Hmm.
issues with it and so forth. And so she's had to deal with homeowner issues, and that's what was freaking her out. Taking care of my mom, that
Yeah.
was easy as far as she was concerned.
Well, that's great. So it
Yeah.
sounds like your mom overall is doing pretty well.
Fairly well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
she's certainly happier than she was in the senior center, so that's an improvement.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Because I think also when the fact that they live together in a way might make it easier because she's right there with her, if she needs anything. When my mom had dementia and she was living about a mile from my house and she didn't want to move in with us. And so, given the fact that she had like a kidney transplant years before, and it was
Mm,
kind of like the finger in the dike at that point,
right.
one,
Yep.
one thing goes here, another thing goes there, which I didn't realize is one of the things that happens as we kind
Mm,
of get closer to the end of our life. Um, and I was running back and forth to give her medications all the time. And it's amazing how stressful it is to be someone's kind of brain and caregiver. I mean, playing that role, even if you're not doing the direct care, just overseeing their finances and their healthcare stuff and their
hmm.
emotional well-being and all those kinds of things is a huge, I mean, it's really a labor of love. you
Louise once
know.
commented that she wasn't sure if it was going to work because my mom and my sister can fight like cats and dogs, but by the same token, they can also be very close. They have one of those,
Hmm.
push me, pull you kind of relationships,
Hmm.
and it works. And I mean, from if it were me instead of my sister, I'd go crazy with that. But for them, it actually worked. I mean, my sister has a degree in drama, for goodness sake. I mean, she's used to drama. Drama is part of the way she thinks about stuff, so it's okay. There's nothing wrong with drama
Wow.
from her perspective.
See, and you're so lucky to have her to do that for her,
Oh
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, my role was basically to make sure all the financial part of it worked, and so that's what I made my job. Figuring out, do we have enough money to do this? What we're going to need for a buffer and so forth, and the plan
And
worked
that's a
out.
huge job in itself.
Yeah, well, we were using our strengths. That numbers and finances are definitely among my strengths, and being
Hmm.
willing to take care of my mom and having the skills to do it and so forth. That was definitely in my sister's wheelhouse.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
was a good deal all the way around. Let's put it that way, because it gives my sister the freedom that she needs to do some stuff. Like I said that she had a drama background. She is also a budding playwright. She wrote a musical play on the story of the relationship between President Thomas Jefferson and his slave Sally Hemings,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's a relatively unpublished play. I say relatively because they've done readings and so forth, public readings, but they've never actually been able to raise the money to put the play on. Well, now this gives her more time than she can try to, find somebody to put up some money so they can put the play on.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So I was also thinking about here, I've got my train of thought going all over the place today.
Well, that's because I just took you in about five directions, so I just added to your load rather than taking away from it.
No, that's okay. That's the way my brain works anyways,
Oh, okay, good.
like a pinball machine. I
Ding
was
ding
thinking
ding
about
ding.
when we were talking with Julie.
Hmm.
You had gotten off after we went on to, just for people who don't know, we went on to Julie's podcast on
On
Thursday
Thursday,
and
yeah.
participated in that a little bit.
I would have
And
actually stayed on, except I knew there were like eight other people between us, and I figured, no, I don't want to wait for all of that. I'm sure you'll do great, so I just gave you some positive energy and rang off.
oh yeah, it was great. And it was very interesting. I mean, she's just such a mix of things, from her background as a an inventor and a medical person and running all
Yeah,
those
interesting
businesses to
background.
turning into being a psychic, and it
Yeah,
just is fascinating.
yeah.
But one of the things that she does on the show is just has people ask questions, and she kind of gives her input as to what she feels spirit is giving as a response,
Hmm.
and ask them also, how do you feel?
Hmm.
Um, and the reason why with this whole idea of the healthcare directives and the death and aging parents and all that came up for me is because one of the things I asked her was, or the main question I asked her was, as a life coach, there's so many different directions that you can go.
Mm.
I love law of attraction, but it's more of a process
Hmm.
rather than a target market.
Right.
Also, like working with people around love partnership stuff. But the area that she thought really stood out was caring for aging parents.
Hmm.
And she heard this like resounding yes, that would be a good direction to go.
Okay.
So I'm sort of just mulling my head around this and was curious. That's why I was asking about your sister's experience
Hmm.
being your mom's caregiver, because it's such a huge, overwhelming ordeal when you're in that position.
It can be,
And
sure.
yeah, a lot of the people that I work with at the hospital come in, and it ends up so many times being that one kid in the family. I mean, you guys sound like you're pulling together and using each of your strengths,
Hmm.
but a lot of times it ends up being that one kid who kind of has everything on their shoulders.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, Also, and the family members don't really want to pay them. They don't feel like there's any value to it. Um, so it's an interesting area to go towards, just because I feel like when you're in that role, you're just desperate for support. You're just so, half the time, if it's one of those things where you have to be with the person 24/7, you're just putting one foot in front of the other, just trying to stay as positive as possible.
Hmm.
So that's kind of an area that I've been thinking about. And she said yes. So I'm like, well, okay. Is that an area I should go? I don't know.
I think you're obviously going to have to answer that one yourself, but my suspicion is that you still need to kind of filter it out.
Mm-hmm.
That you, I mean, you can ask somebody else, including a psychic, for all the guidance you want, but the guidance
Right.
has to make sense to you. It has to work for you, really.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and I felt like, gosh, when I was in that role, I could really have used somebody to give me support and guidance
Hmm.
because you
I'm
don't know who
sure.
to ask questions to. You've got to navigate the healthcare
Oh
system and the
yeah.
hospital system. You don't know who you're supposed to talk to, how to get in touch with the doctor, who you're supposed to talk to about this.
Hmm.
And, one of the interesting things I found too is that a lot of times when with my mom, the doctors would, some of the doctors were great and some were really comfortable with talking about things, but a large majority did not really want to go into that death area
Mm.
and didn't want to bring it up and didn't really want to use those words and would say things, euphemisms, kind of like, yes, she's very ill.
Hmm.
But, it's hard to interpret what that means when you're trying to make plans.
Well, we do the same thing. We call it transitioning. It's dying, for
Mm-hmm.
goodness sake.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's the polite word, right?
Right. Although, I don't know, because when you think about what Abraham says, it might be the dying of our physical body, but supposedly it's not really the dying of us.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah. And
Just
that comes
transitioning to
down to
another.
what you believe about the world of spirit and so forth. And that can be very, very different from one person to the next. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think the key, that, like you said, with them, with Abraham, is that Abraham is saying death, as we often understand as human beings, doesn't actually exist. Because, like you said, the way we human beings understand it, so many of us anyway, death is the end, and life comes to an end, and that's it. There's nothing else after that. And Abraham is saying, no, that's not true at all. Death is just simply a transition from one realm to the next. It's just, one moment you're part of a physical body, the next moment you're not, but you're still going. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's a spiritual belief.
What are your thoughts on what happens?
Oh, I agree with that. That I've bought completely into that. I was talking with Louis about Abraham today, referring to the fact that the way Abraham presents stuff, it's the first time that any spiritual teacher I've ever heard of says stuff that I can just feel like I agree with completely, without giving it
Yep.
a second thought.
It's really true.
And in fact,
It,
Abraham, I said this to Louis this morning, Abraham is the only spiritual teacher I've ever heard of who says that the main purpose of life is to enjoy life. And I thought, hooray, thank goodness somebody was smart enough to say that.
exactly. Exactly. It's true. I mean, I think ever since I did hear it, it was one of those, I think for years I was searching for kind of a belief system. And it just fit so well. When I was little, I was, brought up Catholic,
Hmm.
which didn't really fit well for me.
You and Louis.
I had trouble with the rules. There were so many rules and all the, just the piece of men being the priests and all that kind of stuff. I just had a hard time with it. And I
Especially these
think
days.
even, right, right. And then even as a little kid, I remember thinking when I was in just Sunday school, thinking, well, this is ridiculous. Like we're not supposed to ask questions. We're just supposed to
Yeah,
accept things.
I don't
Are
understand that.
where's that coming from? It made absolutely no sense to me at all. And even, years later, I think when I was like in junior high, I did I kind of became like the born again Christian, went that direction for a while, kind of still searching. And ultimately that was not a fit for me either.
It's funny. I'm thinking about your catechism experience and how you were not allowed to ask questions. And I was contrasting it with my own experience. I was brought up in a Presbyterian church, so Protestant church, so to speak. And you know what the difference is between the two? In the Protestant church, you're allowed to ask questions. You're just not allowed to get any answers.
Equally frustrating.
Equally frustrating.
Yeah, it's true. So, when I was in college, I took a religious studies course. It was just so interesting, all about Buddhism and Hinduism and Judaism, all these different religious beliefs. And all of them sounded interesting, and kind of pieces of each of them kind of made sense to me, but it still was kind of narrow. It kind of had these rules
Mm.
around them.
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't till I heard, I think I don't even remember initially how I got into it. I think I went to Unity Church for a while, which was
Hmm.
kind of a broad, all-inclusive type
Yeah.
belief. I still don't do well with the church thing though, for some reason, but
You and me
there
both.
was yeah, I wish there was an Abraham church.
Well, I don't
I
think
really do.
an Abraham church would look like a church. First of all,
No, it wouldn't.
it would
It would
look
probably
more like a buffet or something.
exactly. That's true. That's true. But there's something about ever since I heard it, it felt right in my bones. I mean, I
Mm.
had absolutely no question. And there's like, no matter what I hear, no matter how many things I listen to, they're all congruent. They all make perfect sense to me. Some are harder for me to wrap, some guidelines are harder for me to wrap my head around than others. Like when they talk about, war or somebody choosing to be born with spina bifida or those types of
Oh
things.
yeah,
Those are
those are
the
the
ones
hard subjects. Yeah.
I really do struggle with those. But everything makes sense to me. It all just kind of does feel right in my bones. And wouldn't that be so cool if there was an Abraham church or just a
I wouldn't know
gathering?
what to do with it, to be honest. I mean, that's like saying there's an Abraham death. It's too silly to even think about.
Yeah, yeah. Or we could just have, Esther here with us every week so we could go there and gather around and be around all those people.
Well, there's actually some organization or semi-organization nearby where Louise and I live here in Connecticut that does Abraham type meals once a month, and they have somebody who channels like or receives like Esther Hicks does. So it's
Oh,
basically
nice.
mimicking what Abraham Hicks is all about. Is that an
Interesting.
Abraham church? I don't know.
It could be. It's kind of. I mean, it could be Abraham too. Who knows?
I'm still trying to figure out who Abraham is because it's supposedly a group of non-physical, non-corporeal
Non-physical.
beings, right?
Right.
And
Right.
the thought that always enters my mind is how do they decide who gets the non-physical microphone? You know,
I
who
know.
who
I can
who
just
whose
see one
voice
like
comes through?
shoving the other one out of the way.
Exactly.
Nope,
Yes.
my
Right.
turn.
No, no, it's my turn.
I know, it's true.
And of course Jerry is over there now. And when we went to the workshop in Stamford, Connecticut this past April, it was the first one I'd ever been to. A number of times during the presentation, Esther voicing Abraham would say, "By the way, that was Jerry." Jerry was
I
the one who said that.
know.
So you can just imagine Jerry kind of pushing his way into line, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, that's my
Absolutely.
wife
What,
you're talking
excuse
to.
me?
Let me in here.
Right, right. Exactly. But I mean, that's what's always so interesting to me too is how do people like Esther, for example, how would they interpret one voice versus another?
Well, I don't think they interpret voices because from what
Or
Abraham has
blocks of
explained,
thought. As
they're,
blocks of thought.
exactly they're blocks of thought, and so what's
Mhm.
really happening is Esther, within her own frame of reference, as she understands life, is trying to interpret those blocks of thought and turn them into English. And so anything that comes out of her mouth is basically going to be what Esther knows about.
Right. Right. But then how does she determine which blocks of thought are coming from Jerry or any of them?
I imagine they get tagged in some way.
I don't know.
I mean, the blocks of thought can include something like "This is Jerry's."
Or it could even include just stuff that sounds like him.
Could be,
So it
yeah.
kind of clues her into that.
He does have a very unique way of expressing himself. And the messages
Yeah.
that she identified as being from Jerry definitely sounded like Jerry messages. Because you know how in
Nice.
the books, especially, Jerry is like the ultra inquisitive one. I can actually appreciate Jerry a lot. Like I was telling Louis this morning, my dad was the consummate question asker, and I learned how to ask questions from him, which has helped me, of course,
Mm-hmm.
with doing a podcast. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have somebody who is that devoted to the art of questioning, you end up with what you end up with in the Abraham books, where Jerry is like mincemeating the topics, like getting it down to the finest detail, and then what's
Oh
the
yeah,
next granular grain next to that one, and then what's the next grain next to that one. I mean, he's
it's
got it
true.
so chopped up into little tiny pieces so that every single aspect is covered.
Hmm.
Well, you hear the same thing from what is reported to be the non-corporeal Jerry. The same kind of reasoning comes through.
Hmm. And it's interesting how, when I've spoken to people who do receive messages or energy or blocks of thought from some sort of non-physical, they always talk about how it's like a tiny little whisper. It's like a very subtle, quiet voice. And I've always, that's one of the reasons I think why Abraham talks about meditating, because you can quiet your mind and let that voice come in.
Well, my
But
sister once told me something very interesting about that because she's identified the same thing. And I have noticed, I think that there have been times where I have received stuff and identified, yes, that's something I received. And it was so quiet, you couldn't even call it a voice. You'd have to say it was like a even a whisper would be too loud. It was so subtle. But
mm,
when I listen to what my sister has talked about, she says from our perspective, it's a whisper. But from their perspective, they're shouting at the top of their lungs, trying to get you to hear them. And I thought that's
It's
an
like
interesting perspective.
it's like Horton hears a who.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah,
And they're all screaming at the top of their lungs, and you hear it as this tiny little voice.
exactly.
When
Yeah.
when you've had that feeling, what was it like for you when you felt like you were receiving some sort of message, or what was it? What did it feel like a message? What did it feel like for you?
Well, it was a source of confusion for the longest time and still is to a large extent because I couldn't distinguish often whether it was me just coming up with a thought or me receiving something. I have since learned
Mm-hmm.
that I can usually distinguish one from the other based on whether or not I had any thought process leading up to it. If it just kind of came out of the blue, I can pretty much trust it was something I received.
Interesting.
Because I didn't actually process anything, you know.
Do you have an example of something like that?
Ooh, geez, can I think of an example?
Now I'm trying to think. I know sometimes when I've come out of meditation and have been really quiet, um, feeling like all of a sudden this impulse to go do something,
Well, yeah,
and
sure.
that's sort of the key time to do that is when you're in that
Yeah, that's what they
when
call
your
inspired
mind is
action.
quieted.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's true.
And it's not even, you're right, it's not like a voice, it's not like
No,
even a whisper, it's more like just an impulse,
it's an impulse or
a
it's a
thought and an impulse.
yeah, it has
I know.
thought-like quality to it. Yeah, boy, this is like how do you describe the color red?
I know.
I
Well,
don't know how to do
it
it.
almost felt like somebody injected this into me. Like, boom, there it is. Like they
Okay,
just
I can't say I had that experience, but I could see that.
hmm
It's more like you know how if, maybe you're trying to come up with some idea and you're working on it and you're playing with it and so forth, and then all of a sudden, it just hits you, and when
hmm
it hits you, you have this thought feeling thing that just says, you know, take the right lane. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any
Or you're
real
just kind of
feeling to it.
finding
It's
yourself
just
doing it. It's like you just are doing it.
well, I usually get it as an actual distinct message first.
Hmm.
I mean, there are times when I find myself, well, actually, during the podcast, there are numerous times where I am talking with somebody like you, a co host, and the co host has been talking for a bit, and I have no idea what I'm going to follow up with. And literally, the other person comes to a comes to a stop on what they're talking about. I open my mouth, and something starts to come out.
Not interesting.
And I have no idea what it's going to be.
Hmm.
And actually, you can actually tell by listening to those podcasts where I say things like, well, sometimes I think, or um, it occurs to me that, or if you
Yeah.
do some kind
Yeah.
of like a precept like that, that's usually me
That's a
giving
good one.
myself
I
time
like
to receive the
occurs to
message.
me.
Just to give myself enough time to kind of get that flow coming because I know it's coming, but it's not quite there. I got to fill some airspace, so I'll fill airspace while it's coming, which is really
Interesting. And I
strange.
think I think the idea of it occurring to you
Mm.
is an interesting thing because it does kind of like drop in there. It's just kind of like
It's
appears.
eerie because I mean half the time I don't know what I'm going to say, and
Hmm.
I'm hoping it's intelligent. I really do.
Most of the time, it sounds pretty good to me.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes I really wonder, like, did that make sense?
And I think it's true. It's like happened even with events that have sort of dropped into my lap. I feel like sometimes when I'm just in that good place and I've been wanting something and all of a sudden I line up with it, it just literally drops into your lap. I had
Mm,
that happen with my old roommate. I wanted to have a roommate and just try it out for 6 months and or for a period of time. I kind of
right.
just wanted to try. I think, I just kind of want to try this. I was just
Hmm.
thinking those thoughts. And I didn't even say anything to anybody. And I kind of said, well, gosh, it would be so cool if I didn't have to, I don't want to really go on Craigslist. I don't want to have to interview people. I
Hmm.
just want this to kind of drop into my lap, the right and perfect person.
Oh.
And this is kind of about how much I want them to pay for a monthly
Hmm.
rent.
Sure.
And literally, like within the next week, I get an email from a friend who said their friend is looking for a place for their third cousin
Oh,
who
geez.
seriously, who was moving here from Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And she wanted to find a place in North San Diego Coastal County, right near where I live. She had an amount in mind. Her highest was my lowest, so we could meet right there.
Hmm.
And she came out and she just wanted it for 6 months because she was going to be going to GIA, the Gemological Institute. I mean, it was crazy. And she was the best roommate,
Oh, good.
just the perfect roommate. I mean, we never even had a disagreement.
Nice.
In 2.5, she ended up staying 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty unusual to never even have a disagreement in that
That's so
period of time.
cool, though, because you let it play out the way it needed to play out. And I say that that's cool because so often, well, this is something Louie and I were talking about today. Or, no, I'm sorry, it was Anne Marie and I talking about it last night. We were talking about how she's into numerology, so she ran my numbers and explained what my numbers meant and so forth. And I guess one of the things in my numbers is stability, and which I found to be kind of a little bit
Meaning that's a challenge for you, or that's something that's easy for you?
meaning that it's in the numbers, and it could be either a challenge or it could be easy, but it's a major factor. And I found that to be rather confusing in a way because I have been very much of a stable person for a long period of time, but I've also found that stability can get in my own way. And in fact, it wasn't until I learned to start climbing outside of my comfort zone that good things started to happen. When I stuck with the stability, it was just like, continuing what I wasn't wanting to have happen.
Right. But then it really goes from stability to stepping out of that. I mean, it's really like it becomes almost like a life lesson then.
In a
Like that
sense,
was
yeah,
your life lesson to have to learn.
right. So anyway, I guess my point is that it's not always a good idea to stick to whatever that plan is. Sometimes it's better not to plan, and that's really what we're talking about with just receiving these things or just going with it or let it drop in my lap. There's no planning involved in that. It's not like you worked out in your head. Well, I think I know I don't want it through Craigslist. So what's going to happen is I'm not going to even place an ad, but somebody is going to contact me and say they're going to look over at the ad over here because somebody is advertised for something. And for some reason, I just thought you start trying to figure out how you think it should play out.
Right.
Instead of just
you
letting
get
it
too
play
much
out.
into the how,
Exactly.
and then you worry. Then you get into the worries,
And
and
then
then you're like, yeah, but there's all this competition. Or there'll be all these other people. And
exactly.
what if it's somebody who's not safe? And blah blah blah. You can go on and on.
You can drive yourself nuts with that kind of thing, and you end up with a result that's completely different from what you had in mind.
Yeah. So I think what percent of the time in my life would it just be better if I could get out of my own way?
I would say 100%.
I know. And it's really challenging for people like myself who have brains that never stop.
Oh,
They
you and me
just go.
both. You and me
Yeah.
both. That's exactly it. I mean, Anne Marie was singing the praises of somebody who's able to map out all the little steps along the way, and I was saying, "Are you kidding? That drives me crazy. I did that all the time. It got me nowhere. I kept making maps to zero places, because the maps had to be endlessly drawn."
Yeah. Oh God. It's true. And I find that, on one hand, it's nice to be able to focus on something, which is another, sometimes there can be kind of a hyper focus. But, in order to really be able to let the universe take us where we need to go, I think it does help to have that flexibility
Yeah, I think
and
so.
that ability to dance in the moment and let the things that come up come up.
And truly, both of them are skills. I mean, there is value in being able to map things out. There is value in just going with the flow. They both have value to them. I think the real question is, where is the balance for each one of us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really true.
Yeah. And I think Anne Marie was saying that last night too.
So what kind of numerology she does? She looks up numbers and she looks up your numbers based on your name and your birth date and those kinds of things?
It's based on the birth date, and she basically uses a system that it's sort of a modernized version created by a guy who is a former U.S. gymnast by the name of Dan Millman. And Millman has worked out this, I guess you might call it a simplified version of traditional numerology. So with your numerical combination, the way she presents it is she gives two words that are, I guess the two words are the Millman words, and the third word that's the traditional, or vice versa. I can't remember which way it is, but it's basically three words for each one of the nine numbers that can make up your number combination. So my number combination was 31/4, And so that makes it
Hmm.
3, 1, and 4. And we went through what the 3, the 1, and the 4 were.
So
It's just,
stability was the biggest one, though. Do you remember what the other ones were? I'm
well,
just
yeah, I got the
curious.
notes right here.
Oh.
I kept the note from last night. 3 was about expression, sensitivity, and communication, which certainly fits the podcasting.
Hmm.
1 is creativity. Uh, what's the second word? I can't read my own writing.
Yeah,
Something with a C
but
and
even that
unity.
first thing you just described sounds like it describes you.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
It really does.
And then the 4 was where the stability came in. 4 is process, stability, and service.
Hmm. Process stability and service. Huh. So did any of that actually tell you new information, or did it kind of validate what you know, or did you feel like some of it was off a little?
I still don't really know what to do with it. I mean, my sister's big on numerology. Anne Marie's big on numerology, and everyone who's big on numerology tells you that you can learn so much from it. It tells you what to work on and so forth. When I hear what the words are and what they are intended to mean and so forth, it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting, and that's about as far as it goes for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it just doesn't have the same impact for me that it has for others. You know, so hey, it works for them. That's great. Just doesn't do a whole lot for me yet. Maybe it will one day. I never know. You know.
Well, and it even reminds me of like the fact that I talked to when I was talking to Julie and she was kind of giving her input. Anytime I've talked to a psychic, which I find myself drawn to them again and again,
Hmm.
different psychics, because I actually signed up for a session with Julie, interestingly
Oh,
enough.
really? Good. Yeah, you have to tell
Yeah.
us about that.
But the idea of somebody being able to sort of guide you,
Hmm.
uh, on one hand, I can understand that having that input would be helpful. But on the other hand, it's like really so much of it, it seems, has to do with who we are and what we're willing to allow and
Yeah, I think
where
so.
we are vibrationally. So,
Yeah. Well, you'll find out whether or not it's for you. That's I think the really big takeaway. You know, is there something in it for you? If there is, you'll get it. If there isn't, then okay. One more thing to check off the list.
exactly. And I wonder how much it affects how she runs her own life.
Probably a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I've learned about, people that I've known who have a very strong orientation that way, it plays a major role in their lives.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We've got a few
Yeah.
minutes left. I want to get a couple of messages in before we finish for the day. And these are not psychic messages. These are my messages, okay? Just want to clarify that. There are messages, actually, because really what they are is, first of all, once again, we want everybody who is not yet a subscriber to become a subscriber. And it's really easy to do. The instructions are on our homepage at loatoday.net. So if this is like your first episode and you're liking what you hear, we've got 11 of these every week, and every episode's different. Every topic is different. It goes off in all kinds of interesting directions. You're going to love it. It really does give you your daily dose of happy. So please do take a moment to subscribe. And then the second message is for all of our people who are regular listeners, including our new subscribers, please continue putting out the messages on social media that you've been listening to loatoday.net. A number of you have been doing it regularly. Some of you have done it occasionally or once or twice. Some haven't done it. But I'm really hoping those who have been doing it continue to do it, and those who haven't do it because we are seeing, Patty, significant increases in our listenership. Over the last 2.5 months,
That's
the
great.
number of daily listens has nearly doubled, and the average listen per new show is up dramatically compared to like 2.5 months ago. So it's definitely paying off. So everybody, please
Wow.
please keep
Okay.
doing it. It is really really helping, and we want more and more people to have the daily dose of happy. It really does help. We want people to be helped. When we want thousands, millions of people to be helped, and the only way that's going to happen is if they find out about us. So help them find out.
Absolutely. And that'd be really cool if at some point we end up having people call in or write in things, questions and things like that, and we can address them. I'd love that.
It is beginning to happen more and more, and as the audience grows, I think that will happen. I mean, once
Hmm.
we get up, for instance, if we're in the thousands in terms of number of people listening to any given episode, I think we're going to have that regularly by that point. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's part and parcel of it. And you're right, it's fun.
Very cool.
It's really fun when
Yep.
that happens. Also, before
Exactly.
we leave, you've got a coaching practice yourself. How does somebody reach out to you in case they want to talk with Patty Framo?
Right now, the best way to get me, since I'm still working on my website, would be Patty at pattyframocoaching.com,
There you go.
PATTYFRAMO.
All right, there we go. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. I don't know what we're going to talk about next week because this is an interesting standard. talking about aging and transitioning. That we probably have more we could talk about on that. But whatever it
I
is,
bet we do.
I'm looking forward to it. We'll see what it is. Sound good to you?
Me too. Thanks.
All
Sounds
right.
great.
Sounds good. And we hope that you'll join us next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.